They had a name for me in our house, not my real name, not the one on my birth certificate. The name they used when they thought I could not hear them, and sometimes when they knew I could. The dumb one. Said casually, the way you might say the quiet one or the tall one, as if it were simply a fact about me, like my eye color or my shoe size. Something that required no apology, because it required no explanation. I was just that. The dumb one. My brother Derek was the athlete. Scholarship at 17, jaw like a movie poster. The kind of laugh that filled a room before he even reached the door. My sister Vanessa was the achiever. Straight lines of A's stretching across every report card, like a runway built for takeoff. Honor roll plaques lined the hallway between their bedrooms. I used to count them when I passed. 12 by the time I turned 14. I had none. I had a shelf full of half-finished model planes and a dog-eared collection of books on things nobody at our dinner table cared about. Astronomy, ancient languages, the migration patterns of birds. I read slowly, not because I could not understand, but because I liked to sit with things. That slowness was mistaken for stupidity, so often and for so long that I eventually stopped correcting people. My father was a practical man. He spoke in outcomes. What did you score? What did you place? What did you win? Feelings were a kind of weather you waited out. You did not discuss them. You did not name them. You simply endured until they passed. He was not cruel in the way that requires effort. He was indifferent in the way that requires none. And somehow, that was worse. My mother loved us the way someone tends a garden they do not particularly enjoy. Dutifully, but without warmth. She noticed what bloomed. She did not bend down to inspect what struggled in the soil. Derek bloomed. Vanessa bloomed. I grew sideways toward whatever small crack of light I could find, and she did not notice that either. There was one exception. One person in my life who looked at me differently. Grandpa Ernie. He was my father's father, and I could never fully understand how that was possible. Two men from the same blood, from the same house, and yet they occupied entirely different worlds. My father measured worth with a scale. Grandpa Ernie measured it with his eyes. He looked at you, really looked, and whatever he saw was enough. He came for Sunday dinners twice a month when I was young, less often as his knees got worse. He smelled of cedar and machine oil, and he kept a small notebook in his shirt pocket that he wrote in constantly. I asked him once what he wrote in it. Everything I do not want to forget, he said. I asked what that was. He said, the things that matter. I asked how you know what matters. He said, you feel it before you can explain it. That is how you know. I was 11 the first time he said it out loud. We were sitting on the back steps while the others watched television inside. He had just watched my father wave off a drawing I had made, some illustration I was proud of a map to an imaginary world I had been constructing for months. My father had glanced at it and said, "Very nice," and gone back to his newspaper. I had folded it carefully and gone outside so no one would see my face. Grandpa Ernie came out and sat beside me. Didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Your father does not know what he is looking at." I did not respond. He said, "That does not mean the thing is not worth looking at." He tapped the side of his head. "You have got something in here," he said. "I have watched you since you were small. Something that moves different from the others. Do not let them send it down." I did not fully understand what he meant, but I kept the words. I stored them somewhere deep and private. The way you store something you are not sure is valuable, but cannot bring yourself to throw away. The nickname got worse in high school. Derek's trophies multiplied. Vanessa's acceptance letters arrived in thick envelopes that my mother displayed on the refrigerator under magnets. My own grades were average, sometimes below. I tested poorly under pressure, which in our house was any situation involving my father's eyes on a page with numbers on it. I learned subjects that were not tested. I forgot subjects that were. Teachers occasionally wrote promising, if unfocused, on my reports, which my parents read as confirmation of what they already believed. I remember one particular evening at dinner when I was 16. I had received a C- on a chemistry exam. My father set the paper down beside his plate and looked at it for a long moment. He did not yell. Yelling would have meant investment. He simply said, "Well, what did we expect?" and picked up his fork. My mother said nothing. Derek glanced at me with something that might have been pity, or might have been relief that it was not him. Vanessa studied her food. I excused myself and went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time, not crying, past crying, in a space beyond it that was very quiet and very still. My phone buzzed. It was Grandpa Ernie. He called once a week, always on Tuesdays, but sometimes in between if something was on his mind. He did not explain how he knew. He just said, "Heard you had a rough one today." I said yes. He said, "Do you know what I was doing at 16? I said no. He said, "Building furniture in my uncle's garage and reading every book I could get from the library because school bored me sideways." He laughed. "I am not going to tell you grades do not matter," he said, "but I am going to tell you they are not the whole story, not even close to it." I said, "That thinks they are the whole story." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father loves you," he said. "He just has a very small vocabulary for it." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. He said, "Get some sleep and call me Saturday. We will talk properly." Those calls with Grandpa Ernie became the architecture of my adolescence. Around them, everything else was noise. In them, there was signal. He asked questions no one else asked. Not what did you score, but what are you thinking about lately? Not what did you win, but what did you try? He had an old saying, "The world is full of people who tested well and understood nothing." Do not confuse the certificate for the education. He was a self-made man in the truest sense. He had started with nothing after the war, learned carpentry, and then engineering by doing. Built a small manufacturing company over 30 years through stubbornness and precision, and the refusal to believe that other people's assessments of him were accurate. He sold it when he was 62, and lived quietly after that, which my father seemed to find slightly embarrassing. A man with that kind of success should be louder about it, I heard my father say once. Grandpa Ernie heard it too. He just smiled. I left home at 18 for a state school 2 hours away. Not a prestigious one. Not the kind Vanessa attended, where parents bragged at dinner parties. A school that took me with my middling grades and offered a scholarship for an essay I wrote about the migration of monarch butterflies and what their navigation system might teach us about human intuition. My father said, "Well, it is better than nothing." My mother said, "At least you will have a degree." Grandpa Ernie called the night before I left. He said, "I want you to hear something clearly." I said, "Okay." He said, "You are not what they made you." He paused. "You are what you have been building quietly while they were not paying attention." I said, "I am not sure what that is yet." He said, "You will find out. That is the whole point of going." He was right. Away from the vocabulary of my family, I found I could breathe differently. Slowly, things I was good at had room to surface. I took an unusual path, meandering through subjects that connected in ways that were not obvious. I studied linguistics, then cognitive science, then spent 2 years working in publishing almost by accident, editing manuscripts for a small academic press. I was not rich. I was not recognized. But I was not the dumb one. I was just myself, in the process of becoming. I came home for holidays. The dynamic did not change, but I noticed it differently now that I had distance. Derek had gone into finance and wore it visibly. Vanessa taught at a university and corrected everyone's grammar at Christmas. My father retired and seemed to grow smaller in a way I had not expected, as if his authority had been stored in the office and could not come home with him. My mother kept the house and kept her opinions and kept me at the same pleasant arm's length she always had. Grandpa Ernie aged. His knees gave out entirely at 78. He moved into a smaller house, a single story, easier to navigate. I visited him on my own, separate from the family trips, and these visits became the ones I looked forward to most. We sat in his kitchen with coffee and talked for hours. He had kept a notebook for every year since he was 30, he told me once. 42 notebooks, all in a wooden cabinet he had built himself. He patted my hand and said, "When I am gone, those are for you." I said, "Do not talk like that." He said, "I am not afraid of it. I just want to be orderly about it." He was diagnosed with a heart condition at 81. Serious, but manageable. He slowed down. He still called every Tuesday. His voice changed, thinner, a little further away, as if it were coming from across a longer distance each time. But the things he said remained precise, intentional, nothing wasted. The last time I saw him before the call came was a Thursday in late October. I had driven out on a whim, no particular reason, just a feeling I could not explain. We sat by the window and watched leaves come down in the yard. He told me about my grandmother, who died before I was born, how she used to say that every person contains exactly one version of themselves that is fully awake, and the work of a life is finding it. I asked if he thought I had found mine. He looked at me for a long time. Not the way people look when they are deciding what to say. The way they look when they are confirming something they already knew. Then he said, a while back, "I just was not sure you believed it yet." I drove home with the windows down, even though it was cold. 6 weeks later, my cousin called me at 7 in the morning on a Sunday. Grandpa Ernie had passed in his sleep, quietly, in his own bed, in his own house, on his own terms, the way he had done everything. I sat down on my kitchen floor, not dramatically. My legs simply did not hold anymore. I sat there for a long time with the phone in my lap and the morning light coming in sideways, and the whole world continuing outside like it did not know. I drove to his house that afternoon. My father and Vanessa were already there. Derek came later. The atmosphere was the particular mixture of grief and logistics that death produces. People moving through rooms with purpose, so they would not have to be still. My father was on the phone. Vanessa was making a list. Derek poured himself a drink and stared out the back window. No one said much to me. I sat in Grandpa Ernie's kitchen and held a coffee cup that still had the ring of where his mug had rested that morning, and tried to understand the fact of his absence. The attorney called the following Wednesday to inform us that the reading of the will had been scheduled for Friday. This was not unusual. Grandpa Ernie had been methodical about everything. We assumed there would be a clean division: the house, the savings, the wooden cabinet with the 42 notebooks distributed among family. We were wrong. I remember the attorney's office clearly. Beige walls, organized shelves, a desk that communicated reliability. My father sat straight, which was his version of grief. Vanessa had a notepad. Derek checked his phone twice before the attorney began. I sat with my hands in my lap and thought about the drive over and whether I had remembered to lock my car. The attorney read slowly. Small bequests first. Furniture to certain cousins. A charitable donation, a sum to an old friend. Derek received the boat, which he acknowledged with a single nod. Vanessa received several pieces of furniture and a sum of money, which she noted on her pad. My father received a letter, sealed, to be opened privately. Then the attorney paused. He looked up and looked at me specifically, and something in that pause changed the temperature of the room. "The estate," he said. The remainder of the assets, the accounts, the property holdings, the investments accumulated over the course of his life. He paused again, left entirely to my youngest grandchild, to me. The silence that followed was not brief. My father turned his head toward me, not with warmth, with the particular expression of someone recalculating a number they were certain about. Vanessa's pen stopped moving. Derek set his phone face down on the table, which was for him a significant gesture. I did not move. I was not sure I was breathing correctly. The attorney continued reading. The figure was stated plainly. It was not modest. It was the accumulated result of 30 years of building and 40 years of careful management. It was more than I had ever associated with any number connected to my own life. There was a letter. The attorney passed it to me across the desk. My name on the front, in Grandpa Ernie's handwriting. The neat, precise lettering of a man who had always meant what he wrote. I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket. I did not open it there. My father said there must be some mistake. The attorney said there was not. My father said he was not in his right mind at the end. The attorney said he had been assessed and documented, and that the will had been updated 18 months prior with full legal clarity. Vanessa said, "This seems very unusual." Derek said nothing. He was already on his phone. I excused myself and went to the bathroom and stood at the sink with the water running and looked at myself in the mirror. I was shaking, not from the money, not yet, but from something harder to name. The feeling of being seen, the feeling of mattering to someone in a way that could not be argued with or revised or diminished in hindsight. The feeling of being, finally, correct about myself. The drive home was long. My father called before I reached the highway. His tone was controlled, which was how I knew he was not. He said he wanted to discuss the situation. I said I would call him back. He said this needed to be addressed promptly. I said I understood and that I would call him back, and I turned off the phone. I pulled over in a parking lot outside a hardware store and took out the letter. The paper was the same thick cream paper Grandpa Ernie had used for important things my whole life. The handwriting was a little unsteady toward the end, but it was his. He had written 3 pages. He said that he had watched me from the time I was small, and that he had seen something the others had not looked for. He said that a family can sometimes agree on a story about one of its members and repeat it so often that even the member begins to believe it. He said he had watched that happen to me and that it had troubled him more than he ever said out loud, because he had not wanted to make it worse by drawing more attention to it. He said that he had not left the money to punish anyone. He had left it because he trusted me with it. Not my father, who would have treated it as a trophy. Not my siblings, who would have treated it as a resource. Me, because he believed I would treat it as a responsibility. He said, You have been building quietly your entire life. Now you will have room to build out loud. He said, I know you are not sure of yourself yet. That is fine. You do not need to be sure. You need to be honest. And you have always been that. He said, do not let them make this about them. It is not about them. He ended with, I have watched you become exactly who I thought you were. That is rarer than any inheritance I could give you. This is just the material portion. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes. Cars pulled in and out. A woman walked past with a dog. A child ran ahead of his mother and was called back. The ordinary world continuing at its ordinary pace, while mine had shifted on its axis. What followed was not simple. My father retained an attorney. He used words like undue influence and diminished capacity, the vocabulary of people who believe that outcomes they do not understand must be the result of manipulation. His attorney sent letters. My attorney responded. The process was tedious and slow and deeply unpleasant. My father and I spoke 3 times during those months. Each conversation was the same beneath its surface. He wanted me to explain why I deserved something he had not expected me to receive. I could not explain it in a way that would satisfy him, because the explanation was Grandpa Ernie believed in me, and you never did. And that was not something either of us was ready to say plainly. Vanessa sent emails that were courteous in structure and hostile in implication. She used the word fair frequently, as if fairness were a mathematical principle and not a thing that depends entirely on what you are measuring. Derek called once and said, "Look, I am not going to pretend I am not surprised." I appreciated that. It was the most honest thing any of them said. The contest failed. The will was upheld. The documentation was thorough, and the attorney was clear. And Grandpa Ernie had, as he did with everything, been orderly about it. I did not celebrate. I sat with it quietly for a long time. There is something strange about receiving something you did not know you were waiting for. It rearranges things. Not just practically. The arrangement of your own interior. I had spent so long operating as the one who was not expected to amount to much, that a part of me had accepted the weather, not consciously, not explicitly, but in the way the body adapts to cold if it has never known anything else. The inheritance did not just change my financial situation, it changed the temperature. I bought a house. Not a large one with good light and enough rooms for a real library, and a garden that needed work. I spent the first year filling the library and learning the garden. I donated a significant portion to organizations I had researched carefully, an endowment at the state school I had attended, a fund for literacy programs in places that reminded me of myself at 14. I was not trying to be significant. I was trying to be honest about what the money was for. I spoke to a therapist for the first time in my life. She was precise and did not waste words, and reminded me slightly of Grandpa Ernie in her economy of expression. We talked for 1.5 years about the family story, the nickname, the dinner table, the report cards. what it does to a person to be told early and often that they are not quite enough. I learned that the story was not true. I already knew that. But there is a difference between knowing something and no longer being moved by it. And the distance between those two things required work. My relationship with my parents changed. My father and I reached a kind of civil distance, not warmth, not resolution, but the absence of open conflict. He aged and became less formidable, and I became less afraid of him, and we found we could sit in the same room and talk about certain things. Not the important things, but some things. My mother was warmer, once the money was no longer a controversy, which told me something I did not want to examine too closely. I examined it anyway. I forgave them in the way that does not require them to know it happened, quietly, privately, because it was for me and not for them. I opened the wooden cabinet with the 42 notebooks the spring after everything settled. I had not been ready before. I sat on the floor of my new library with the cabinet open and took each one out slowly. They were dated on the spines in black ink. I began at the beginning with a notebook from 30 years before I was born, and I read forward through a man's life. He was funny. That surprised me, though it should not have. He used irony and self-deprecation with precision. He had doubts he never showed. He had fears that looked nothing like the man I knew at Sunday dinners. He had loved deeply and lost things and rebuilt without fanfare and continued. He wrote about my grandmother on almost every page of the first 15 notebooks, and reading it was like being introduced to a love story I had not known I was part of. He wrote about me in every notebook from the year I was born onward. Not constantly, not dramatically, but consistently. Small observations noted the way he noted everything in the clear, careful hand of a man who meant what he wrote. He wrote about a drawing I had made at 8 that he had kept. He wrote about a question I had asked at 12 that he could not stop thinking about. He wrote about the migration essay that got me into college. He wrote, in an entry from 4 years before he died, "She does not see herself yet. I am patient. She will." I sat with those notebooks all afternoon and into the evening. I did not cry at first. Then I did, for a long time. The kind of crying that does not come from sadness exactly, but from the feeling of something finally arriving that you waited for without knowing you were waiting. He had been paying attention the whole time, every quiet year. The world had a name for me for a long time, the dumb one, said at dinner tables and in hallways, and in the spaces between sentences where evaluation lives. I carried that name for years, the way you carry something heavy before you realize your arms do not have to hold it anymore. Grandpa Ernie had a different name for me. He never said it directly, but I found it in his notebooks, written in that careful hand on a Tuesday in October in the year I turned 30. He wrote, "She is the one who understands things slowly and completely, and that is rarer than fast. She is the one who will last." I read that sentence and put the notebook down. and looked at the light coming through the window of the library I had built in the house I had bought with the inheritance of a man who had watched me become myself and waited to tell me with his whole estate. I was not the dumb one. I never was. I was just the one he was saving it for. And when I understood that fully, something that had been braced inside me for 30 years finally let go. Not with a crash, quietly, the way the best things end. Today, I live in the house with the good light. The garden is better now, though not finished. The library holds more than I have read and less than I intend to. The 42 notebooks are in the wooden cabinet he built, and I open one whenever I need to remember that being seen is possible. That one person paying attention is enough to undo a great deal. That the stories our families tell about us are not our biographies. They are just stories. We are the ones who write the truth. I learned that late, but I learned it completely. I think that is what he meant all along.